Good afternoon and thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. In June, Governor Shumlin signed Vermont's new water quality legislation. The law aims to reduce the amount of pollutants that reach our lakes and rivers from water that runs off our farms, roads, roofs, and parking lots. Although many of the policy changes have not been finalized, for the first time, small farms will be required to get certification from the state. The Agency of Agriculture will hire additional staff to inspect and certify thousands of Vermont farms that will be expected to comply with a list of accepted agriculture practices that control runoff. So to find out what farmers need to know, I'm with UVM Extension Equine Specialist Betsy Green, and Betsy today is with also Ann Swinker. Ann is the Extension Equine Specialist at Penn State. Thanks both for coming in.
Great to be here.
Now, Betsy, you've been doing proactive water quality education with small farm owners for years, and you brought Ann here now for your annual livestock and equine education workshops. But talk a little bit about some of the outreach that you've done in the past.
Yeah, in the past we had fall workshops every year, and I try to have them at 2 different sites through the state so that, one south or in one central, one north, and just try to get it so that folks can go, don't have to travel a long way to get the experience. And I have some pictures right there. Vermont Technical College we had with Jesse Stewart there. We held Bridget McIntosh came, and we had, that was 2 years ago. There's the site where we were overlooking their facilities and talking about pastures and runoff and high traffic. And then at that same year we had one in Alberg, and so we went way north. And Phil Perro was a great host, and we had great examples of some of the things he'd been doing, but also some of the things that could be improved. And while we were talking about the livestock and stewardship and land, we also had things for like body condition scoring, feeding the horse, etc. This was actually last year in Johnson, and the first one was in Johnson, and then the next one we went down to event that's actually a pastures up that were grazed versus not grazed, and you can see the difference with the the fence lines and everything else. And we also went down to Ferrisburg that year. And so just getting people to look at facilities with a different eye, both for their pasture health as well as their horse health. And then
and then there was this.
Yes, and this one and the next one, my point is, it doesn't matter what's on your pasture. It's just a matter of you have to deal with it.
That would be a problem to deal with, I would think.
Yeah, that's a high traffic area.
Now, it looked like there were a lot of people that attended these workshops.
Yeah, folks come in because, well, part of the reason we put something that will draw them, as well as the stuff that they need to know.
Right.
I mean, the fact is, that's like this time when we're doing our pasture workshops with Ann here, we have arena footing and some questions, tips, and myths and things like that about arena footing inside and out, because Ann has done a lot of that work, and so that draws them. And we're also talking to them about being proactive about especially these upcoming regulations.
Yeah, the new Vermont law isn't 100% final yet. For instance, the state hasn't even yet defined a small farm, but this law has a high potential to affect lots of Vermonters who may not have been regulated in the past. What are some of the key components?
Yeah, so we've been preaching about accepted ag practices.
Right.
Always talking about where your manure is, how far from the well, the fence line, the water, any waterways, things like that. And so those accepted ag practices are actually going to turn into required ag practices. And there's some changes as far as distance from wells and things like that as well that will really potentially affect folks with what they currently have and what they may need to do. Another thing is, I'm trying to think of what we're coming up with. The manure storage is a huge one, and manure handling and soil testing and all these things that folks should be doing, but now they'll be required to do. And it looks like a small farm may be 10 acres or more, and then whether it's a farm or not.
But still, even if you have 1 or 2 animals in your backyard, you could be affected.
Yeah, because we have, if you have mud and you have direct runoff, you know, this is our high traffic areas that we actually improved at UVM because we had a lot of mud and muck, and you can see that we had drainage underneath that to try and reduce the water running through the manure. So whether it's direct runoff or whether it's non-point source pollution, so it's coming from a second area, you're responsible. And that's something that's a little bit new for folks.
Well, Ann, it's great to have you here, and I want to bring you to the conversation. So what were some of the biggest issues that you had to help horse farm owners with based on water quality?
In Pennsylvania, we had the same issue with, traditionally the horse operations weren't included in the regulations until 2008. And I'm up here with Betsy because we're conducting these workshops to try to convince horse owners that it's just as important to take care of the environmental stewardship as it is the animal welfare. And horse operations have been used to really preparing the horses for competition, athletic competition. Takes an awful lot of effort and work, and we're trying to get horse operations to look at the entire stewardship of the property the same way, with the manure management, the pasture management, and you know, taking that as serious as you do competition and breeding and the care of ownership. So convincing some of these horse operations to take the responsibility has been a real issue for me in our state. A lot of owners feel that the manure is just put out there and nature will take its course, and that's
Which
not
it does.
the case. Eventually.
Yes, but sometimes it takes it right down to the streams, rivers, etc., lakes.
And I know you brought some pictures that we want to take a look at that sort of demonstrate this.
Okay, well, like manure management, some operations just left their manure there for years and years, and maybe the next owner of the property takes care of properly disposing of it. And that's just not acceptable today. We don't want these piles of manure near streams or water, and they're working on the distances away from wellheads and streams and lakes. But you need to come up with a management plan of how you're going to dispose of it. If you're going to have it exported to another farm or to a compost facility, these are things you need to do. And managing pasture, we have to keep that pasture as healthy as the horse so that it can absorb all these nutrients and not have sediment and you know, an erosion washing down into our water sources. So managing pastures, rotating, reseeding, fertilizing is going to be just as important as training horses. And there's all sorts of ways that you can measure. This is a Frisbee that we developed that you and your children can throw, and you do a score sheet to see the pasture condition that you have, and it's just as effective as some real agronomic methods of.
Yeah, one quick thing, we actually used this last night to demonstrate, and you actually throw it about 20 times in a pasture, different areas, and you identify, like if you put a mark on it, one place, and say what's by there. Is it bare ground? Is it weed? Is it good solid grass? And then she has a worksheet that you fill out, and so with that you get a good estimate of what your pasture contains and the high quality or maybe not so high quality of it.
And that way you get to actually measure it and manage it and know whether you need to take the horses off if the pasture's getting too short. But with the Frisbee, we found out that you shouldn't have dogs there.
Good point. Defeats the purpose.
It kind of defeats the purpose a little bit. This is an example of just some pastures, a small operation in Pennsylvania that was pretty well managed. And but you need to pay attention when that grass is getting too short, and we recommend, you know, it gets down to 3 inches, you need to move. And depending on the species of grass, there's different ways to manage it. Also, arenas. That's dairy farms, poultry farms, they don't have these large areas that don't have vegetation. And we have to be really careful with our arena footing, with dust and erosion. You have to be careful that some of the arena footing isn't washed out of the area. So you need to maintenance these arenas and keep them just as pristine.
Yeah, and in that case too, you're saving your money and your footing if you're being proactive and using good stewardship and maybe directing the water around the arena instead of across or through it.
Right.
So your stewardship and footing. I mean, so that's a win-win.
Now, what about if somebody comes along and develops next to or below your property? I know we have some new neighbors moving in, and I'm concerned that they may start complaining about flies or
well, we had a perfect example of that at Washington State University because we had hilltop stables, and somebody cut out below that and built apartments for the students. And so everything, even if we were 100% responsible and good stewards, when it rained, it went down, and there were things washing down onto the asphalt parking lots. And even yesterday when we were doing our workshop with at East Hill Farm, they have to deal with water that's coming off the road, and they actually had to build a cistern and collect the road water, so it's not something they've done, it's just what's coming.
And it was coming off the public roads, not their own personal road.
Yeah, and then divert it so that it could be filtered before it got to the waterway below them. So even though it, quote, wasn't them,
right,
they still had to deal with it. And that's something that's a little hard for people to get a hold of here as well, anywhere actually.
Right. What are some of the questions that you get from folks who come to these workshops?
Well, the first is, well, why do I have to do this?
or I only have 2 horses, so this doesn't involve me.
Right, that'd be my line.
But then you take a look at some of the folks that just have 2 to 4 horses for recreation and no business, just fun, but yet they have a hard compacted area that's way overgrazed and not cared for, and the manure standing on there with water running through, they can actually be just as bad or worse than some of the big equine facilities with putting direct water washing through manure into waterways. So that, and the manure storage as well, because they don't necessarily think about their small amount of manure contributing, but yet it does.
And if you add up the 2, 3, 4 horse owners, and you look at all of the horses that there are in the state,
plus, and many of those are recreational, suddenly it adds up.
And so what are some of the resources that are available to help people?
There's a lot of agencies. Cooperative Extension here at the university has a lot of information. The NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation, also has a lot of information and possible grant funding to assist with putting manure handling facilities in, with water diversion. There's also conservation offices.
Yeah, well, and the Agency of Ag, with the funding for the water quality stuff with the legislation for H3035, that is supposed to come with some funding that can help small farms mitigate some of their possible contributory issues to direct or non-point source pollution. So, and that's all yet to be determined, but those are the types of things that we need to be actively involved as a horse industry to be a part of the upcoming rulemaking on that, because if you're not a part of it, you still have to live with it. So better be a part of it to get, figure out how to get assistance and help.
I think that's a really good point, because do you think that there'd be some small farm owners who don't want to bring attention to themselves by asking questions?
Well, the problem is other people are in there in those discussions, and I brought some folks from the Ag Agency to the workshop, and it helps them see how to work with horse folks as well as get an exposure to what's important for horse owners and how they can better educate, but also learn from what the needs are of these small farmers.
And also, too, maybe just getting the farmers together to talk about what worked on their farm, some solutions that they can draw from.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so what would be the first thing that people should do? Is there a website that they can find?
Well, if they can go to the Ag Agency, they have a lot of information, VermontAgriculture.com, to look at what's going to be the required ag practices currently listed as the accepted ag practices, and get an idea and find out where they stand in the situation. They can also contact Extension and get folks to talk to them about what the requirements are and where they might need to first do action. But proactive is much better than reactive. And so if they can work to improve their facilities before they get put under the eyeball,
Yep.
then folks will be much more willing to say, okay, you're working, now let's try and work further, as opposed to you've done nothing.
Right, because there are lots of resources.
Yes.
And a lot of people are already doing these practices, and most people want to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And what they need to do is document it, record it.
Yeah.
Keep your soil tests, start a notebook of everything you've done, if you've contacted any agencies and they've given you recommendations that you've implemented. And this is evidence proving that you're not in violation, or you're trying to improve issues that maybe you've inherited.
That's good advice. Thank you.
Great.
That's our program for today. I'm Judy Simpson. We'll see you again next time on Across the Fence.